Mashau, and I would like to welcome you to the series of many webinars that we're going to have here at the Graduate School of Business. This is the first one, and I'm welcoming you on behalf of the Dean and Head of School, Professor Anna Martins. She's unable to be with us today because she's attending to another agent mentor. And I would like to first explain some house rules first before we can start. You are allowed to ask questions, and then all the questions that you want to ask, you have to write them on a Q&A section of Zoom. Write all the questions there, and then we'll select questions and group them together and post them to our speaker. Slides and video will be made available on the GSB&L website. If you want the PowerPoint presentation, you will have to write to the speaker and request the PowerPoint presentation. The Graduate School of Business website is gsbl.ukzn.ac.za. Today we're going to talk about a sector that contributes billions to the economy. This sector is currently in dire situation. Of course, ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking about the informal economy. We are currently experiencing unprecedented times in the face of COVID-19 pandemic, where a lot of businesses are not operational. First, I would like to thank you for making time to attend this webinar. This webinar is aimed at empowering you with information to navigate the unprecedented challenges that comes with this COVID-19 pandemic. We are at a time that we are trying to save jobs and securing the future of small businesses that are in the informal economy. And ladies and gentlemen, we are currently losing more businesses than we are losing lives. There is a direct interconnectedness of small businesses in this sector and large corporations that are in the formal economy. Most of the products that this sector produces, they are materials that they buy from the formal sector. The informal economy transcends beyond survivalist businesses. Actually, in this sector, there are businesses that expands within this sector. And you need to think beyond just a street trader. The businesses that are in this sector, they are businesses that are servicing cars. There are people who are making films. There are also musicians in this sector. So there are varieties of services that are in this sector. There is a big difference between black market and the informal sector. It's very important that you know that businesses that are in this sector, they work within the confines of the law. We at the University of KwaZulu-Natal and the Graduate School of Businesses, we will continue to engage this sector in order to capture new developments and innovation in the sector. It is indeed unprecedented times, and post this COVID-19 pandemic, we can be assured that consumption patterns, preferences, and behaviors will be altered. Then we have to attend seminars like this to try to predict the outcome of the behavior after the pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest today is a specialist in Kasi economics or township economy. He is a white man that was born in South Africa during the apartheid time. He was raised and bred as a Zulu man. He was raised in a mud hut in one of the poverty-stricken and violent parts of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. He wrote a memoir titled The Third World Child, where he tells his story growing up as a Zulu man. His second book is titled KasiNomics. I had pleasure to read this book. It's very interesting, which casts the light on the invisible metrics at the heart of South African informal economies, and also the livelihoods of the people that are within this sector. His third book is titled KasiNomics Revolution. It explores the revolution taking place in the great marketplace of the informal sector. He has been, in his time, a shebeen owner, a political activist, and a community worker. He is also an African adventurer. He is fluent in isiZulu and speaks most of South African languages. He is a founder of Minanawe Marketing, a leading activation business in South Africa, which was recently sold to an international agency network. Our guest, ladies and gentlemen, is Gigi Alcock, who is going to cover topics regarding the informal economy. He will give us an overview of the informal economy. He will talk about the impact of COVID-19 on the informal economy and the entrepreneurs in this sector. He will also cover up the trends and expected impacts. He will also discuss opportunities that can be capitalized. Ladies and gentlemen, Gigi Alcock will give us a presentation for about 40 minutes and keep the question, write all the questions that you have on Q&A section, and then we'll read out the questions to the guest speaker. The virtual platform is yours.
Morning. Can you see my screen? Great. Morning, everyone. So I'm going to be talking about a term I coined called KasiNomics, which is basically the term for the township or ekasi or elokshi. So I was really struggling to find a term that covered the informal sector and ended up with KasiNomics. Although the informal sector is not only in the townships, it was really a term to cover this. And what I'm going to do is just go into the informal sector as it existed before COVID-19, just to paint a picture of the scale and the dynamics of that sector. And then I'll go into how the sector has been impacted or adapted to this sector. So I think the starting point is that generally we have these massive misconceptions about the informal sector. We talk about it being survivalist or subsistence businesses or micro businesses. And we kind of feel sorry for people in that space. So like an example is the lady on the left-hand side there, I call her Golden Delicious. This lady is in downtown Johannesburg. Her and her husband sell 3,000 vetkoek or amagwinya every single day for R1 each. They also sell about 500 rands worth of cheese slices, polony, and so on, and tea and coffee. So they make about 3,500 Rand a day, 6 days a week, of which they make about 40 to 50% profit on that. So they make themselves easily 1,500 Rand a day, 6 days a week. They're building a 2-story house in downtown, in Meadowlands in Soweto. And yet we walk past them and we feel sorry for them. Across the street from her is a young 24-year-old lady who couldn't find a job and so started selling amagwinya as well. She came from Limpopo 4 years ago. She sells 6,000 vetkoek a day and she employs 3 people, her brother and 2 other people. The lady in the center is a lady at a school who sells snacks. And I was chatting to her and I said to her, how long have you been selling here? She said, 26 years. I was like, yo, 26 years sitting on this upturned bucket and plank. She said, I put 2 children through university on this selling from here, and my husband has been unemployed the whole time. So this lady earned 6,500 Rand a month profit on her selling. Again, we look at her and we go, oh, shame, but she could be a domestic worker and earn half of that, work 8 hours a day, travel 2 hours in a taxi. This lady works for 3 hours a day, first break, second break, and after school. So again, we have to change our dynamic. The other thing that we tend to do is we kind of consider that the informal sector is unsophisticated because it's informal. And I think it's very important. Informal does not mean inefficient. It does not mean not profitable, and it does not mean unsophisticated. It just means that it operates in a different dynamic. As an example, the guy on the right-hand side is a trader in downtown Johannesburg, a Somali trader, on 3 smartphones at the same time, talking to his shop and checking the internet for specials while at the shelf. And this is fairly common that we see. So let's just look at the landscape. The tendency is to say that the informal township sector, the Kasi sector, is just shacks. And this is built by, in essence, historical bias as well as a media perception, because stories tell us of people who are suffering and this and that, because in the media, if it bleeds, it leads. Now, I'm not saying there's not poor people, but we have to look at this properly in perspective. The reality, and these are figures from SA Household Survey, that show that on the right-hand side there, formal dwellings represent over 80% of our population. So contrary to popular opinion, shack settlements or informal settlements only represent about 12% of our population. The other perception is generally that there are these large homesteads with 10, 12 people or so on in homes in the township. If you look on the left-hand side, the households are growing faster than the population, driven largely by the fact 1/4 of households consist of one person. So 25.7% of our population is actually a single person. And I'll show just now how the backroom rental sector is an indicator of this kind of phenomenon. On the left there, the single generation is 14% of our population, which is in essence a mother and 1 or 2 children. And this is borne out by the fact that if you look at social grants, there are about 8 million mothers who have an average just under 2 children per mother. So in essence, we're talking about a mother and 1 or 2 children, or we're talking about single households making up almost 40% of our population. So people live in formal dwellings and relatively small households. In 2008 in South Africa, 80% of white kids grew up in a household with both parents. For Black African kids, the figure was 28%. So in essence, we're talking about a women-led generation of small households and formal dwellings. And this becomes quite important because we need to adapt to the population and the dynamics of lifestyle. And if we look at the backroom rental sector, the backroom rental sector, indicated by the house and the backrooms on the right there, is about 20 billion Rand plus in backroom rental earnings. These are rental earnings that are not measured in any form of statistics. And over and above that, there's an additional 25 billion earned by township households in spaza rental. And backroom rental has been one of the fastest growing sectors, indicated by a whole number of research, not only mine, and which again is not measured. So we're talking about almost 50 billion Rand a year is entering people's pockets in this rental sector. And backroom rental growing, of course, because of those single households, among other things. The tendency is to say that the township, the Kasi economy, the township economy is about spazas, spazas, and spazas. And people's sense about a spaza is a hole-in-the-wall spaza like that one in the top left. Now, yes, there are about 70,000 what I call the Kasi forecourt, or what is often called Opijimamfana, because when you need something, Opijimamfana, run, child, go and buy stuff. But the spaza sector is incredibly diverse. And in the center there's about 30,000 spazarettes or supermarket type spazas that have developed in this township space, turning over about 150 billion Rand an annum. These are supermarket format. These are often priced on par or cheaper than ShopRite or Pick n Pay. And this spazarette sector has completely disrupted the formal retailers. ShopRite, Pick n Pay, Cambridge, Boxer, all of these have seen declines in sales as a result of this and are scrambling to try and compete with the spazarette sector. If we look at the spazarette sector, it's generally driven by foreign immigrants. There are 4 primary groups that dominate 85% of all spazas and spazarettes. Those are Somalis, Pakistanis, Bangladeshi, Ethiopian, and Somalian. And And they have completely changed the dynamic of the spaza sector away from this hole in the wall to very much the supermarket type format. They give credit without interest on grocery items at month end. And we're talking about a 250 billion rand informal retail sector of about 100,000 outlets, including on the bottom right there, a wholesale or cash and carry sector. But the township is not only spaza shops. There's a multitude of others, and one of the largest sectors is what I call KasiNomics, or the fast food outlets, the informal fast food sector. There's about 50,000 outlets ranging from Amakota to Amapleti to Isbindi, Hlogo, and everything in between. From premium Shisanyama type outlets all the way through to street traders selling fairly low cost items. This sector employs about 200 to 300,000 people and turns over about 90 billion rand a year in value. The interesting thing about this sector is it is 100% South African. South Africans will not buy prepared food from an immigrant, and the immigrants generally don't know the flavors and tastes of the South African diets. In the bottom left there and in the center is what's called ikota. It's a quarter loaf of bread with slap chips, polony, and acha. In 2004, I was asked by Parmalat to launch cheese slices into the township, and we chose to launch into the Kota and Amagwinya or Vetboek sector. Today, cheese slices going into this township fast food sector are worth 2.5 billion rand a year in a sector that never existed before. In fact, the sector existed, but the cheese slices never existed. When we launched this, it was, township kids who were rich were called I'm a cheese boy or cheese girl because there was no cheese in the townships. So this just indicates, this cheese slice sector just indicates the potential of the sector when we recognize the outlets and understand the dynamics of that. Tabletop traders is another huge sector, particularly in the vegetable and food sectors. Fruit sectors and vegetable sectors. I mentioned the school mamas just now, and I'll come back to that. There's about 500,000 hawkers, tabletops, or roving sellers, and they make between 3,000 and 15,000 rand a month. In fact, just an example, the bottom line there, the Joburg fresh produce market turns over about 4 billion rand a year. Of those, about 60% of their turnover on vegetables is actually going into traders, porters, and fish and chip outlets. And at the beginning of the lockdown, the fruit and veg traders were not allowed to sell. And immediately, 40% of the volume of the Joburg fresh produce market disappeared. Can you imagine the impact on the agricultural sector if we did not have this fruit and veg sector of informal traders, porters, and so on? So a very powerful and high impact sector. The school mamas, I mentioned the lady on the bottom left there, just put it into perspective. There's about 10,000 township schools with 5 to 8 mamas per township school. Because in most township schools, you get given ikeri or pocket money to buy your snacks or lunch rather than a lunchbox. And it drives a thriving sector. Now let's just put that in perspective. Let's assume, unlike the lady on the bottom left there, that you make, instead of 6,500 rand a month, just 3,000 rand a month on your little table. Multiply that by 10,000 township schools and multiply it by 5 mamas per school, and you're talking a 2 or 3 or 4 billion rand sector, depending on how you do the sums. Then there's the Gasi mechanic sector, a huge sector, about 80,000 outlets or auto traders, ranging from guys like the central left there who are doing Mercedeses and have a garage, all the way through to the guy who sits outside Midas, and you drive up and and you buy your brake pads and you walk outside and he fits your brake pads or your shock absorbers, or whatever. So again, a really dynamic and powerful sector. Hair salons, or the hair care sector, goes from Diva to Dunusa salons. Dunusa salons are, Dunusa means bare bum, because when you wash your hair, your bum is out bare in the street. There's about 150,000 of these salons, hair sellers, braiders, barbers, and so on. And the value is about 10 billion rand, which is actually quite low. But the reason it's 10 billion rand is that most outlets make money from styling and not from selling the actual hair care products. So if you look at the hair care sector, including the products, the hair extensions and so on that are used, it's substantially higher. This 10 billion rand is in styling alone. And then there's a number of other sectors I won't go into from a time perspective. Bakeries, Kasi bakeries, supplying everything from people's, from cakes to buns to bread to the border outlets, Kasi chemists, taverns like the Dugemini bar over there, internet cafes, and we go on. The Bakkie Brigade, the top left there, the people who are doing deliveries, who are fetching vegetables from the fruit and veg market, delivering it, or the Bakkie Brigade on the bottom there who deliver to the spaza shops. So there's a whole delivery sector there, highly sophisticated. And then caterers, event hire for unveiling ceremonies, baby showers, weddings, funerals, and so on, renting out tents, doing the catering, and so on. And then the Kasi building sector, and particularly Kasi renovation, is huge. And this is really about, like the bottom right there, is, you know, every house in the township used to be a 4-room house or is a current RDP house, and yet this sector rapidly transforms with people renovating, adding back rooms, adding another room onto their house, putting in fancy ceilings, which is really popular in the townships, or putting in stop nonsense or the front wall around your house. So a really big sector there as well. The taxi sector is well known. I won't go into it, but about 250,000 minibus taxis. And this sector breeds a whole range of downtown economies, like the ladies selling at the taxi ranks, like the guys who wash the taxis, like the panel beaters and the mechanics who service the sector. So we also have in the townships the formal sector of, in essence, malls and shopping centers. And what we have seen is that there's been a dramatic decline in shopping centers, about 20% decline year on year, which mirrors what is happening to shopping centers in India, America, and everywhere else. And so what we have seen is that malls have become 25th to the 5th of the month, primarily because people go there to draw their money for social grants or other elements. And the tendency is that most bank accounts are post boxes. People draw 100% of their money, and they basically operate in cash for the rest of the month. The experience of most people of malls is also a negative experience. First of all, the biggest dynamic that is driving spend in the informal sector is the cost of transport. So if you're going to the ShopRite or to the mall or whatever it might be, it costs you between 8 Rand and 15 Rand to take a taxi, plus 8 to 15 Rand back home. And if you've got a large amount of groceries, they charge you a penalty of a second seat. So it can cost you anywhere between 20 and 30 Rand or more to go to the mall. Plus, generally, the mall is an experience. You take your kids, you dress up, you take Bobo, auntie, whoever goes. So there's a high cost. The negative about the mall is that people's experience of malls is queues. It's queues and queues and queues. And there's a highly negative element around it. You queue to get in the taxi, you queue at the ATM, you queue at the ShopRite, you queue at the Pep, you queue at the KFC, and you queue at the taxi on the way home. And these are 2-hour queues, 3-hour queues by Borgos, mums with babies on their back, and so on. Where you can walk to the Spazarette 2 minutes away from you, and there's no queue, and someone will help you carry your 12.5 kgs of flour home. So, you know, the formal sector does not necessarily represent premium or a better shopping experience. The informal sector has really come to the table in terms of that. So with COVID-19, what have we seen in terms of survival strategies? The first is we've seen the bakeries were allowed to stay open, and what we saw was, this is a bakery I wrote about in White City in Soweto. And what they did is that immediately they lost their business from orders and stuff. They put on Facebook, they put on their range and their price list, and they said to people, here's our WhatsApp number, WhatsApp us your location and how many loaves of bread or whatever you want, and we will deliver it to you. And then they got these trolleys with guys who sometimes walked up to 15 kilometers, and they would in essence follow the location pin that was sent to them on WhatsApp and deliver the bread there. Very quick response to this. The fast food sector was closed until recently, and then when it was opened, it was allowed to do deliveries. So what happened there? The first is that if you look at the pink quarter outlet at the bottom there, they just operated from the back of this, and they were operating throughout the close down. And what we've seen is that when livelihoods are threatened, people will go back to work no matter what, because places like a hair salon or a quarter outlet or whatever are impacted, and livelihoods become more important than health protocols or restrictions. So this outlet was operating out the back. And when delivery was allowed, very quickly, you can see Bafokeng corner on the right bottom there, they immediately put on Facebook their menu, and they had an umfan running down the road going to deliver. The top right there, this guy was delivering to outlets, and so on. So very quick response using WhatsApp, Facebook, very effectively as a form of online ordering, and this happened very quickly. They also benefited because this was a statement: we're benefiting from the lack of KFC and McDonald's. When your child wants a burger now, you get the mikota. And the police and the army eat from our shops. It's good business. Many of the outlets were saying to me, you know, they must never leave the townships because they have to eat as well, and they come to our shops and then we serve them. So there are people who benefit from this. And then what we saw in the recent time is now people have just gone back to work because you know, and someone said to me, you know, Gigi, the townships are now at level 1. You guys in the suburbs are at level 4. And what we saw, these were pictures from last week of upholsterers moving back onto the street. There's a fruit and veg seller with a trolley operating around. Everyone with masks, as you can see, the tailor moved out of his house onto the street. And the dynamic of informal sector businesses is almost 80% of them are either based in or around a residential area. So it becomes very easy. It's not about going back to work. It's about opening the door. So there's a hair salon in the backyard, or this upholsterer has got the upholsterer in the front of his home. And even the car wash is opened. And what did they do? They said to the police, listen, for to we'll wash your car, just don't close us down. And there's the GTI being washed. And that was in the center of the lockdown. So, so lots of survival strategies and the ability to operate, you know, to very quickly move back onto the street and start operating. We did some research, a survey of about 5 rural districts and other surveys. And out of it, we've kind of said, what are some of the medium-term trends in this sector? So let's start with the shopper impact. The next 6 to 8 months, we will continue to live under some form of restriction, or more importantly, we will have an impact on the Kasi economy, in fact, on the total economy, but we will particularly see it on the Kasi economy. And so we will have a hangover over that time. More importantly, behaviors and habits that have been adopted will remain post-lockdown. And I'll talk to some of those habits. The first thing is that what has happened is that the grant recipients have become primary breadwinners over this time. There's 11 million grant recipients. 3 million old age recipients earn 1,860 Rand a month. They now earn an additional 250 Rand a month, which is a substantial amount. 9 million child grant recipients receive 440 per child. As I said earlier, around 2 kids per mom. So we're talking about we'll call it 900 Rand a month. They now receive an additional 500 Rand per mom. So we're talking about almost 1,000 Rand a month. If you have one child and so on. So if you look at the average mom, she is now receiving 30 to 50% more than she used to receive. There's going to be this 350 Rand COVID unemployment grant. It could be almost another 10 million people. So taking 11 million plus anything from 5 to 10 million additional people, we're going to have 1 in 2 or 1 in 3 South Africans will be receiving a grant. And this is people at the lowest level of the economy. So what is happening now is the pensioner and the social grant mom is becoming the main breadwinner and, more importantly, the main decision maker in terms of purchases. And I'll go into purchases just now to show you how that's being reflected in what they're buying. So this woman-led small family or single or double generation is a growing demographic. The picture on the right-hand side of the child, the gorko and the mom, this is our shopper, this is our consumer from a business perspective. These are people who will remain having money and will certainly be the decision makers, and it is not large families, as I said earlier. The 350 unemployment grant, it's what a hawker can make in a day. As you can see from the numbers I showed earlier, it will not have a big economic impact. Although you may find someone who's a hawker who also earns this 350 Rand, so there may be a benefit there. It is not going to have a substantial impact on household incomes. In rural incomes, I'm working with, in fact, in Msinga, my brother still runs a community project there, and what we saw over the lockdown, they were not able to sell livestock, particularly goats, which sustain a large proportion of our population. And they lost, the goat agribusiness project estimated 250 million Rand in lost goat sales in just 11 districts in KwaZulu-Natal. That just gives you an idea of the impact of this in terms of incomes at every level. And so even in those rural areas where the goat, you know, livestock sales would have been important, the social grant becomes a more important form of income. So food is the primary beneficiary of grants, both at the retailer as well as the manufacturer, whether that retailer is informal or not. So what we have seen is that people have gone back to basics. The primary products that are growing, maize meal, sugar, rice, flour, oil, spices, bread, milk, they're all low margin within the spaza sector, particularly, and the retailer. There's increasing growth of combos. You used to see in the spazas on the top right there, combos is a big part of how they've been successful, understanding what are the staples that people buy, putting them in a combination pack. But you can see in the bottom right there, Boxer has jumped onto the bandwagon very quickly, and they're offering a 350 Rand combo, targeting those people who earn the 350 Rand COVID grant. What we've seen is sweets and snacks are way down, primarily because kids are not going to the spaza shops. The spazas and spazarettes are not allowing kids to go. So kids aren't going, and so kids aren't going and, for instance, taking 15 Rand from mum, buying a 12 Rand loaf of bread and spending 3 Rand change on sweets or snacks. Plus, no hawkers are stocking. So many of the spazarettes and stuff would be selling large packs of sweets or chips or whatever to that outlet. There's a search for value. People are looking for cheaper with quality, or 3 for the price of 2 or extra 100 grams. This is where the opportunity lies for brands in terms of offering this value. Smaller pack sizes are growing. People are stretching. So where people are buying a 2 kg, they're now buying a 1 kg and so on. And very importantly, prices have gone up everywhere. Despite whatever's been said, everyone has taken a price increase. And so the spaza owners are complaining that the wholesalers are charging more, and the consumers are complaining that in both formal and informal retail, prices have gone up. One of the impacts is being that additional cost because kids are not at feeding schemes and at home 24/7. One of the research groups, just to quote it, the schools are closed, so the children do not eat at the feeding scheme. So the cost of groceries has increased because I need to buy 2 bread a day. Food gets finished because there are school kids at home who make it hard. So everyone knows who's got kids, when you've got kids around, they're always snacking and whatever it might be. So this is an unintended consequence of closing schools, has meant that the cost of groceries or the ability for your kids to have either breakfast or lunch at a feeding scheme has now impacted on poor communities. What's going to happen over the next 6 to 8 months? Essentials or food will continue to grow at the expense of other categories and luxuries. Although we believe there will be revenge buying from those who have more income, so outside of the social grant people, I think that there will be revenge buying, alcohol, fashion items, partying more, and already we're seeing lots of backyard parties happening. And hair and styling. I think hair and styling is going to be this. The lipstick effect is well known, where people spend a small amount of money on lipstick to get it when they're struggling, because the impact is good and you feel like you're spoiling yourself. I think the hair salon industry, the moment it opens, is going to dramatically grow and benefit from that. So these are social grants. Those 11 million people are going at month end, and they're queuing up to draw their money. And so we seeing this dramatic and scary effect. On the left-hand side is the Siki Siki, and on the bottom right is Tugela Ferry, and you can see the queues there. Despite social grants, this was the end of, this was the first week of May, and it'll happen again in the next few months, the first week. So terrifying scenes of congestion. How is this going to impact? Malls and formal retailers are winners of social grants, especially at month end, and rural towns will grow in importance for month end. They already were, but it's going to become even more, particularly with this growth of this grant as an impact. But only for month end. So formal shops have benefited also because people are wanting to escape lockdown at home, so they go to the local shops to just get out. But the mall in the rural town is a day out at month end. This is going to continue, and you're going to have from the 1st to the 5th of the month, when the payments are made, we're going to see them benefit. But it's still going to have pain points. The cost of transport, those queues that you saw in those videos and pictures, are now going to be impacted by less income and the danger of queues. But long-term government is going to find ways to mitigate month-end queues by getting cash to be drawn further and further afield. And some of the banks are looking at growing their ATM footprint dramatically outside of the malls in order to be able to address that and benefit from it. Local retailers, so now not the mall, but the shop right on your street corner, or your Spar, or your USave, as well as Spazarettes and Kasi fast food outlets, have benefited from lockdown and will particularly benefit from post-lockdown. Fast food outlets will revive really fast, and then the local neighborhood store is going to be more important than ever. Spazarettes will benefit from the fact they offer credit to grant recipients, so grant recipients will shop there more, as well as proximity that people are saving on transport costs. When times are tough, people look at every form of where they can save on expenses. The taxi sector is restricted. They operate only at certain times, so we're seeing that they're losing out, especially in rural towns. And these were some of the quotes. You know, cars are scarce and they're available early in the morning and afternoon only. Due to scarce cars, you find they become too full. Transport availability and cost are going to drive local shopping, and taxis will lose out. And also, there are no fun trips, there's no school transport, and there's no church events where you're traveling and hiring a taxi. So that whole sector is going to be impacted by this. So where to? Where is this going to all end up in the medium term and potentially long term? The first is there's this growing, I spoke in my books about the Afropolitan generation, which was in essence people who were culturally African and yet ultra-modern at the same time. And I think that there's going to be even more of this growth of the KasiPolitan generation. This is a generation of people who are this distinction of Kasi as a suburban space. We've seen it to a large extent, townships as dormitories. And never before have we had people not going to work or leaving the townships. And so the township as a dormitory is gone, and very much has become this a place where you do your local street or your high street grocery, entertainment, takeaway services. The growth of the township as a business sector is going to grow as people have used it now, and they will continue to use it going forward. We need to connect with these consumers, understanding this geographic space, lifestyle, and mindsets. And that Kasi metropolitan generation, what I call the average Joe Ekasi, is not necessarily someone who only lives in a township. It's also someone who just has that mindset. And in fact, in one of my books, I wrote about a guy who's a millionaire who lives in Bryanston, who was hanging out in a high-end tavern in Soweto. And I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "I sleep in the suburbs, but I live in the township." And so this is necessarily someone who's geographically based there, but it is going to grow. And how do we adapt to that consumer? Also, local as Lekker is going to grow. So basically, this time of lockdown and physical distancing will fast track a new way of doing business. Local and neighborhood is going to grow. As I mentioned, local neighborhood shopping is going to grow, whether it's a KFC in your suburb or a Gota outlet or a Shisanyama or a Chicken Dust outlet. Formal and informal will benefit. A ShopRite, a KFC, a Spazarette, a Gota outlet will benefit from being in that locality versus the mega malls or the shopping centers outside of the neighborhood. If I was going to invest in a property, I would invest in what I call strip malls, which are in essence those little row of shops that you would find in the locality. We're seeing this, of course, in the formal economy as well. The corner spa is growing in importance over the hypermarket in the mall. Growing sector of collection and delivery. The Bakkie Brigade, as I mentioned in the center image there, Kasi Online, and I put it in inverted commas because it's done in different ways. There's already many businesses. One is called Order Kasi in the Western Cape that is doing deliveries of everything from vegetables to fast food. I got a great, someone sent me a great thing from Jane First in northern Limpopo, where they are doing a mall queue for you. So you can actually, instead of standing in that queue for however many hours to draw your money, there's youngsters at this mall are offering for 10 Rand, they'll stand in the queue for you for the day, and you can chill until they call you and say, okay, come and draw your money now. So I think we'll see a lot of that kind of innovation. In developed economies, the new way of doing business is online and virtual. In Africa, this is going to be WhatsApp and Facebook before online and internet. People do not trust the internet, but they do trust WhatsApp and they do trust Facebook. So Facebook Messenger, placing ads like I showed you with Bafokeng, WhatsApp and Facebook are going to grow dramatically. Data-free apps and use of free Wi-Fi. In the top right there, I call these bum fences. Those are people at a community center which has free Wi-Fi and it's closed over lockdown. So people are reaching through the palisade fence there to get the Wi-Fi inside the property. Kasi malls, free Wi-Fi. A lot of people using Kasi malls for that. Also, if you look on the right-hand side, this is a product called Malaysia.com, where you can send food products to Zimbabwe using this free data app. And all you do is you scan the QR codes and you load that, and those groceries are then sent to your mother or wife in Zimbabwe. Quite extraordinary business using QR codes for a really low-income sector. I wrote about Hello Pesa as a KasiNomics revolutionary, and they continue to break the rules around that. Bottom left, I was involved with Moya Messenger. Moya Messenger is a completely data-free app. The hash data-free platform allows data-free websites and so on. Have a look at that. I believe that this form of online activity is only going to grow. The technology that's going to benefit is technology which networks and resolves pain points or costs. What do I mean by networks? If you look at Airbnb or Uber, what has it done? It has basically networked a large number of small businesses, massively fragmented. So you have a large number of rooms available, and what does Airbnb do? They network that and they make them available. So they in essence, congregate a large number of individual businesses. This is the opportunity. How do we take those 150,000 hair salons and network them? When you're looking for a back room, what do? You walk down the room saying, "Funny room," and tell your room, and then you find it. What is the opportunity to find a back room, advertise a back room? What is the opportunity to book a hairstyling at the local Dunosa salon? or pay for it and so on. So how do we network this informal sector, which is highly fragmented? Or how do we resolve pain points? So like that mall queue for you that these guys are doing in Jailfirst and Limpopo, they're saying the pain point is people standing in a queue for 2 hours, and therefore they are offering this, this service to people. So we need to understand, what are people's pain points? How can we resolve them? Or how do we resolve costs? And these are the areas where the opportunities lie. Money will remain short in the short term. And so this hangover effect is going to be there. And so what are the opportunities also to resolve pain, save things like, for instance, the cost of transport to go to a mall and so on. At the end, I think the most important thing is business mirrors biology. Apparently, Darwin said that those who survive are not the strongest or the most intelligent, but the most adaptable to change. The reality about the informal sector is they have low overheads, they are relatively small, they are agile, they are very adaptable, and what we will see is that they will in many ways survive the lockdown and the impacts post the lockdown and of coronavirus by being incredibly adaptable to change, being able to pivot their businesses and be able to adopt things like WhatsApp ordering or Facebook and these kind of elements to very quickly change their business to a new world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I will still encourage you to send questions on Q&A. We have 2 questions for you, Gigi. The first question is from Malindi Kunene, who's asking you your feeling about the big players such as Pick n Pay and Shoprite who are entering into the Spaza Red space. And she's asking whether this will cripple the current owners, or do these big players also have a chance in this sector?
Great, thank you. What I'd like to do, I just want to go back to my presentation because I did have I will answer that question. It's a very good question. I had a previous question before we actually, before I presented, and I just want to talk to it very quickly because a very important thing. The question was, Gasi business with billions, most of these business will not conform to compliance systems. How can government tap into this? What are your thoughts on the development of a measurement index for this sector? So my answer is this is very important. So every one of these small businesses pay VAT. So we must never say they do not pay tax. They pay VAT and they do not claim VAT like most large businesses do. So there's a net benefit to the fiscus of the VAT that is paid by the sector. They would pay for rent and for security of tenure if they were given that opportunity. If they were told, you own this piece of pavement as an example, but you need to pay rent for it, they would. Warwick Street in Durban is an amazing example. I recommend there's an NGO called Asiya Dafleni that has done some amazing work there. Just proves that these people are prepared to pay rent and do pay rent. There's a need for us to decash the system though. And here is a huge opportunity for businesses. Is that in South Africa, it's all about cash, and current deposit and card transaction fees are exorbitant. So, you know, what is the opportunity to allow financial payment and deposit for small amounts at many points regularly, which is affordable. The other thing was, as I mentioned earlier, not all Gasi businesses are spazas or survivalists. We need to consider the range and sectoral needs and segment and measure. So look at it as a multi-sector environment. And very importantly, registration systems are crazy in South Africa. If you want to register your business to make it more formal, it'll take in South Africa 40 days. In Rwanda, it takes you 4 days. We need to look at micro business appropriate forms. So you know, CIPC wants to register you as a PTY, it takes you 40 days, and that's if you're lucky. So we need to look at how do we enable registration or a different type of registration for the sector. I recommend also what I'm saying is a BE for immigrant. How do we make those immigrant traders enter the system by offering them benefits for registering, for paying certain levels of rent and so on? We need to look at different ways of incentivizing people to enter the formal tax, rental, and so on system. Cool. Going back to the how's the pick and pays and all of that. So the reality is that ShopRite has tried USave Ekasi. They're container-based stores that are that are kind of like a Spazaret, but they've got 30. They've got about 30 around the country versus 30,000 Spazarets. The reality is that the Spazaret is the next big retail sector, and there is no way that the formal sector is going to change that. They do not have any of the survival elements. They're not placed in those communities. They, the cost of transport works against them. So the only way that the Pick and Pays or the ShopRites would be able to challenge the system is then having a larger number of small stores, which of course they're not geared to. I have long suggested the opportunity for the ShopRites and the Pick and Pays and stuff is to become more of a wholesale type business, supplying the Spazaret sector, and if necessary, having some form of micro franchise into that sector. But for the foreseeable future, I said 6 years ago that the Spazaret sector was going to be the next big retail sector, and everyone laughed at me. Today, most of the formal retailers have admitted and are trying to find ways to address this, and this will continue to be the issue. Cool.
We have another question again from Blessword, and then this is about hairstyles. He's asking that people have spent so much time on natural hair. Will it be possible that after these the regulations are lifted, that people will now appreciate their own hair, natural hair, and not go to the hairstylist?
You know, you shouldn't ask a person who looks like me about hair or hairstyles. So, look, I think that the natural hairstyle movement is growing, but and I had a whole chapter about hair in KasiNomics Revolution and the scale of it. But the kind of hair extensions and so on sector, I believe is growing far faster. So I think that all those people whose braids fell off or whatever are suddenly going to want more of it. So in fact, if anything, I think the high fashion or the non-natural hairs is going to, and that's what I said in that one line around the benefits. The salon sector is certainly going to benefit post this because people are going to splash out.
Yes. Professor Pillay is asking that a lot of business Spazarets are primarily owned by foreigners. Do you see that changing in the future?
So yes, 85% of that whole Spaza sector is owned by those 4 groups I mentioned. I must just point out that they never own the properties; they rent those properties. So that's that 25 odd billion I highlighted that they're paying to South Africans for those properties. Will that change? No. If in fact in the next in 20 years' time you will have an entire sector of South African, Somali, Spaza supermarket type owners who have naturalized. In fact, what we've seen already is that most of the Somali immigrants are able to get legal paperwork because they are from a conflict zone. The Ethiopians and the Pakistanis and Bangladeshis struggle because they're economic immigrants and so they don't get refugee status. But many of those Spazarets, we saw it post-lockdown, Spazarets were allowed to open, or the Spaza sector was allowed to open on condition they had a health certificate and they had a CIPC registration. We saw about 30% of all Spazarets in key townships that we surveyed opened almost immediately with a health certificate and a CIPC registration that they had prior to that. So all they're going to do is they're going to naturalize more and more. What we saw over lockdown is that most of the Spazarets were giving food parcels to the poor within their communities. So in fact, you know, using food parcels to basically, you know, get favor within the communities that they're operating.
Yes, thank you. We also have another question from Dr. Gwenya, who's asking that if there is any way that the authorities could repurpose disposable income within township to circulate at least 60% in the townships. This is asking if this can be done by incentivizing Kasi retailers, cash and carry owners, for instance, the ones that are owned by Kasi dwellers.
That's a subject very close to my heart. In fact, I wrote a chapter called Inclusive Economics about this very subject, and it's quite detailed, but very importantly, we currently pay the social grants in a way which excludes the informal economy and excludes the South African trader. As an example, one of the reasons the South African spaza sector was destroyed is that you'll see it coincides almost directly with the entry of the formal retailers like ShopRite and Cambridge into the townships, and it coincides directly with the payment of social grants through the retailers. What it meant was that the person who was buying at the spaza shop now went to the ShopRite, drew their social grant money, and then spent it at the ShopRite versus at their local general dealer or store. I believe very strongly we have to make financial payment systems available where people can draw money at a hair salon, at a border outlet, at a local general dealer. And this is one of the ways of in essence, assisting South Africans compete with the immigrant traders and the formal sector. So I believe that there's a big opportunity to push payment systems down into that sector as a way of driving it. The second element is, if we look at, I made a submission to the Competition Commission Grocery Inquiry, and my submission was that formal retailers in townships were anti-competitive, and there was a number of findings that were made, which many of them corresponded with what I suggested. One of them was that terms that are available to formal retailers should be available to informal or smaller businesses. As an example, ShopRite can get 120 days or 90 days terms from Unilever or Tiger Brands. They get rebates, they get listing fees, they get all sorts of benefits, which means that they can get a bag of Omo or Ace Maize Meal at substantially better rates than the spaza shop or the Kota outlet or whatever it might be, or KFC can do the same. We should be ensuring that those terms, if a ShopRite can get a bag of Omo for R5 as an example, then the spaza owner should be able to get the same terms as that. And this was made as a voluntary recommendation by the Competition Commission. I'm suggesting this, among other recommendations, should be enforced by law, particularly, and I've made a submission already on this in terms of post-COVID. One of the things we have to enforce is this form of behavior, because one of the ways of stimulating our small business and Kasi sector.
Okay, thank you. Second to last question. Nomzamo would like to know if these small Kasi outlets, if you see them being legalized in the near future, or should I say, see any other form of government intervention? She would also like to know if what can be done to avoid this going to big malls just to access money and grants.
Cool. So in terms of to stop going to malls, I think that we need payment systems that allow people to draw money and deposit money closer to home. Even, for instance, the Stokvel sector. We're talking at 2.5 billion rand a year, 44 billion rand total sector in savings. All of that money is deposited when people go to a mall and stuff. Imagine if they could deposit that money closer to home and not have to take a taxi and so on. So I think the financial systems are an important system. So what is the starting point of that question?
The starting point is about legalizing.
Yes. So this goes to my point about saying, that it takes 4 days to register a business in Rwanda and 40 in South Africa. We have to take away the bureaucratic hurdles, number one. Number two, we need to incentivize. What is the benefit of a business registering? Currently, there is no benefit of a business registering with CIPC. Despite, even if they went through the 40 days, there is no benefit. So we need to find ways to incentivize. And one of the things that we have seen liberate small businesses throughout Africa, particularly in the informal economy, is access to credit to grow their business, to get additional stock, and all of these kind of elements. You currently, however, cannot get a micro loan for business. You can get a micro loan for personal purposes. You cannot get a micro loan to renovate your house or build a back room. And so there are no financial services, particularly access to credit, to grow your business in that sector. And if we made it as an incentive that if you registered your business, you would have a pre-approved loan or various other elements, I think that would be an easy way to encourage people to register. I'm currently talking to the microfinance industry to say, why are they not building loans for small businesses and capitalizing on this 300 billion Rand loan facility, guarantee loan facility that the government has offered banks. Of course, none of that will reach this low end because banks aren't able to give a 5,000 or a 10,000 Rand or a 15,000 loan to a small business that may need a small amount of money. The micro loan industry is able to, has the ability to do that kind of thing. But we don't have that low end ability to finance businesses or to lend them money. And it's a major pain point and a major restriction in terms of the growth of the micro and informal business sector.
Thank you for that. And then the last set of questions is, first one is, what are the most critical COVID-19 lessons to be adopted by the state in enhancing informality in the country? And the second part of that question is, what are the policies and viable strategies that can be adopted by the informal sector to ensure sustainability in the sector?
So I think the biggest lesson was learned really early on. Right early on, at the lockdown, the government said no vegetable traders and no spazas may be open, and people must take a taxi to the formal sector ShopRite. And immediately we saw taxis were full, queues outside ShopRites and Pick n Pays and so on. So I was one of many who put in submissions to say this should be opened, and within 2 days they opened this because there was an immediate recognition of the impact and the benefits of the informal sector. And over, I've been involved with the Business for South Africa work stream on the township economy. And over that time, there has been a recognition, for instance, when the fast food outlets were allowed to open, they included the informal fast food outlets. So there's been a recognition of the services and the scale increasingly by government of that sector. And I believe that it will translate into better policies, better regulation. The Gauteng government very quickly built an online permit registration facility for small businesses, because when they allowed hawkers and stuff to go, they said they needed a permit, and suddenly outside the municipality in Johannesburg you had queues of people, and it's worth looking at. They very quickly built this online permit issuing service, and it was this recognition of the sector, and I think that the long-term benefit is and one of the things that government wanted to do is how to support informally employed people. And there was no real database, no real way of doing that. And so hence the 350 Rand unemployed person grant was done as an interim measure. But there's this recognition that they need to find ways to engage with the sector, to build regulations, bylaws, financial, FICA regulations and so on, that are better adapted to the sector. So I think that there's certainly a growing recognition of that sector and its importance, and I hope that will carry through.
A quick one before we end the session. Stockfields are one of the important part of the livelihood of people in Ikasi. So one of the participants is also asking what roles do they play during this period in stimulating the Kasi economy?
So I think the big thing is that most people think that stokvels are just a group of gorkos saving to buy gross at the end of the year. And the reality, only about 26% of stokvels are grocery buying stokvels. The rest are saving stokvels, and most of these stokvels are also, many of these stokvels exist more for lending money to members than anything else. And in fact, I mentioned the financing before. Some research has shown that a large number of small businesses, from salons to gorda outlets, that have been funded or started with loans from the stokvel or payouts from a stokvel. So very important sector. What we saw in the rural areas as well as in the townships is that people immediately moved their stokvels onto a WhatsApp stokvel group. And what you do is you deposit your money when you're at the mall, and then you take a photo of your deposit slip and you would send it to the chair lady on the group. So again, very quick move to that. What we've also seen in a few small surveys is a growing element of people saying, we want to borrow money so I can start my business again. So the ability to loan money from the stokvel to buy stock. So vegetable hawkers saying, yo, I ate through all my savings and now I need to get potatoes and tomatoes and stuff to start selling at the rank again. And where do you get the money? You're not going to get it from the government, borrowing it from the stokvel, 1,000 Rand or 2,000 Rand or whatever. So I think that the stokvel is going to play a big role in terms of helping small businesses reignite and get going again.
Thank you. And if our participants wants to contact you, how do they get hold of you?
So the easiest is I've got a website, ggalcock.com. And alternatively, I have a KasiNomics Facebook page, and on LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn as well, and I post a lot of info and stories there. But I have my contact details on ggalcock.com. And then obviously, if you want more info, KasiNomic Revolution is my latest book. It's probably the better of the three and the most up to date. So that's available on Amazon or Take-A-Lot or exclusive books and other bookshops.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for attending. I think this was a very informative session. And please remember that we are hosting a series of webinars. We have another one coming next week on the 3rd of June. We are going to be hosting Dion Chang. I believe the information are shared now on the screen. Please also RSVP for that session. Gigi Alcock, I would like to thank you for giving us your time and such a wonderful and graphic presentation. We have went well above 10 o'clock, and I would like to thank all participants and have a great day.
Thank you.